This is a short film that humbly attempts to trace the journey of scriptures that make up Hinduism. It is a very long journey. A 21st century commoner like me often finds it extremely hard to fully grasp books on spirituality because of my own lack of sense of history when it comes to Hindu scriptures. So, this is an attempt to trace the chronology of Indian scriptures and place them in their right context. Brace yourself because this is going to be a long journey into the past. It is hard to say with complete accuracy, but we are talking about at least 3500 years, maybe 4000 years, maybe even more. Let us begin on a more general note, a more universal note. What exactly is a scripture? It means just this: a holy book. Now, Hindu scriptures, broadly speaking, are divided into two branches: Shruti and Smriti. Let us start with the former. The first branch, Shruti, refers to that which has been heard. Now, questions arise: heard how? Heard where? Heard by who? Well, heard originally through divine manifestations. It is most likely the result of intense meditation by the sages of ancient India, the result of a life dedicated towards self realization. These Shrutis are essentially the Vedas, the earliest and perhaps the most revered Hindu scriptures. Vedas derived from Sanskrit word Ved means knowledge. But what is this knowledge that we are talking about at least 4000 years ago? To a modern man, knowledge has become something rather tangible, totally rational and ultimately a logical pursuit. We might think of knowledge as pertaining to physics or biology, or if you are a millennial like I am, perhaps technology and computers. In other words, when we speak of knowledge, it is invariably knowledge about matter. But when we speak of knowledge in terms of Vedas, we are talking about something much more profound. We are referring to a true expression of spirituality itself. This knowledge that Vedas speak of, it is knowledge about the nature of reality itself. Vedas have four volumes which were composed over a period of time. These four volumes are the Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Sam Ved, and the Atharva Ved. The earlier portions of the Vedas are essentially composed as samhitas or hymns. So when you have a puja in your house to bring good luck upon your family, your priest is most likely reciting hymns from these early portions of the Vedas. If we pay close attention to these hymns, you will find a lot of personification of forces of nature like wind, water, fire, rain, mountains, oceans, and so on and so forth. This is actually a very common practice found not just in Vedas but in many religious scriptures from almost every ancient civilization. It perhaps stems from the prevailing belief at the time that it is in man's best interest to keep these forces of nature happy. Tsunamis and wildfires and floods and quakes have, after all, expressed their wrath on humankind for as long as you can dial your mind back to. So it is not unnatural that the earliest notions of religions are deep rooted in nature worship. In fact, at least here in India, nature worship continues to be a big part of our daily lives even after 4000 years. For most 21st century modern men, with all our comforts and delusions, it might seem a tad orthodox that the origins of scriptures, not just Indian, but around the world, have their roots in nature appeasement. But in those ancient times, it would have understandably seemed like a safer bet to have nature as a friend. In fact, if I were making the same bet even today, I wouldn't hesitate to take the same odds. The second part of the Vedas are the liturgies, collections of very detailed and elaborate rituals. These include, among vast swaths of instruction, things on how one should worship. This is the ritualistic part of the Vedas, prevalent somewhat more in the latter of the four Vedic scriptures. Let us take a brief pause here. Up until now, we've seen the hymns and the rituals, but not much by the way of spiritual inquiry into the nature of reality itself. That only comes towards the very end of the Vedas through what is known as Aranyas. It is here for the first time that you might encounter the idea of heading into the forest, perhaps the foothills of the Himalayas or into the lush greenery of southern India, and simply meditate. It is here that perhaps for the first time the idea of involution begins to take shape. Or, in other words, beginnings of an idea that the nature of this reality can only be fully grasped by looking inwards and not outwards. To put this in even simpler terms, it is here that a very fundamental stream of thought germinates, that it is not possible to ever understand the nature of this reality through our senses alone, that the infinite can never be fully grasped via the finite. So it is here in the Aranyas, mostly towards the end of the Vedas, where the spiritual and even philosophical beginnings of the Hinduism lies. These little gems of spiritual brilliance, although found en masse towards the end of the Vedas, are actually sprinkled throughout the four Vedas, and collectively these are what we refer to as the Upanishads. Now let's take another brief pause here, because this is a major milestone. The Upanishads have a very high position of reverence in the annals of Indian scriptures. In fact, in terms of spiritual inquest, it is perhaps the single greatest source of knowledge. The Sanskrit word Upanishad, seen literally, could be mistaken to mean "come here, I shall destroy you." However, as terrifying as that literal meaning might be, it actually refers to the destruction of delusion about the nature of reality itself. There are a total of 108 Upanishads. It is true, there is a lifetime of reading in the vast world of Indian scriptures. However, if you're serious and committed to understanding the nature of reality via ancient Indian scriptures, there are probably 11 or 12 Upanishads which can be your gateway. And these 11 or 12 Upanishads are not necessarily voluminous. In fact, some of these are as compact as 12 verses. Another thing worth pointing out is that the Upanishads are generally composed in the form of poems and not arguments or lengthy discourses. There is this general thought among the scholars of Indian scriptures that tries to explain why the authors of Upanishads chose poetry over prose. The argument is simply this: divine revelations from God are usually best explained in the form of poems. It is because often these revelations to a mind that is willing to grasp are so simple and straightforward that a few verses suffice. Therefore, it is fair to say that the Upanishads are the throbbing heart of Hinduism. Unfortunately, most modern Indians have probably not read the Upanishads in their true form. Perhaps it is because of the abstractness of the Upanishads. However, what most Indians, even modern day millennials, have heard of is the Bhagavad Gita. This holy book essentially synthesized, compiled, and reconciled most of the teachings in the Upanishads into one single volume. The 700 odd verses inside the Bhagavad Gita is the heart of the heart. In a way, it is even more marvelous for a modern day man because it doesn't cite abstract poetry alone. In fact, it makes an attempt to practicalize things. Or, in other words, it is perhaps the most powerful way of understanding how to implement religion in our daily lives. Now, let's take a quick pause here again to reflect. We've made quite a journey already, from the Vedas to the Upanishads all the way to the Bhagavad Gita. There might be differences in these texts in the terms of their expression. There are certainly different levels of abstraction and authoritativeness. However, there is one thread that binds all of them together. It is in that single common quest to better understand the nature of this reality, beyond the pale of just the body and the mind. Now, let us turn back the wheels a little bit in this moment. At the outset, we began by subclassifying Indian scriptures into two categories, Shruti and Smriti. All this while, we've been talking about the first branch, or Shruti. It is that which is heard. Heard how? Through divine manifestations themselves. How could one hear such divine expressions? Is it the monopoly of a chosen few, or is it for all? Well, it is certainly not a proprietorship of a select few. And that is precisely why we've had countless rishis and saints and sages and seers who've expressed these revelations. This has happened and has been recorded all throughout the vast history of this land. However, the road to these revelations is typically an arduous one, often requiring intense meditation and giving up all compulsions as well as pretensions, and de emphasizing the high status in which we hold our physical senses. The early sages of this land, who had such revelations about the nature of reality through intense meditation, often expressed them in ways that were not really easy for everyone to grasp. Poetry was often chosen over prose, abstract over allegory. These were the norms, in fact, in the early part of the Indian scriptures. Now, the second branch of the Indian scriptures is called Smriti, or that which is remembered. In this category, you'll find something that is at the core of all human journeys: creation of narratives, or simply storytelling. With the emergence of these narratives, stories, and epics, something that was very abstract up until that point was suddenly metamorphosed into something more digestible, more relatable. There are some stories which are not just profound works of fiction. In fact, they've got actual historical veracity. The two most revered epics, or simply long stories, are of course the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. These are two epics that have permeated every Indian household, often transcending religious lines in this land. A lot of this has of course been passed on to us by word of mouth in our own families, but on top of all that, in the 21st century, these epics have been beamed into our living rooms through satellite television. Now, a modern day mind which prides itself, rightly or wrongly, on being extremely rational and logical may read these epics in their entirety and find some of the things in there far too fanciful. This has been a constant criticism from skeptics. However, it must be understood that while these epics have historical veracity, in their early history they were passed along generation to generation through oral traditions. So it is natural that things could have been added or subtracted. A little embellishment here, a little dilution there. That is not unusual in oral traditions. Therefore, it is instructive to not get caught up too much in establishing cent% accuracy. In addition to these two famous and world-renowned epics, the Ramayana and Mahabharata, there is a huge mass of literature available in India. It is usually very descriptive and instructive and colorful. Ancient India was brimming with storytellers. Some of that spirit still survives in India, as we have no dearth of incredible stories that surface from every nook and cranny of this incredible nation. A relentless quest of Vedic and Vedantic exposition gave birth to 18 Mahapurans. The word Puran means just legendary. Out of these 18 Mahapurans, 6 each are devoted to the Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva respectively as godheads. It is perhaps here that Hinduism starts to take its modern day avatar. It is perhaps here that the origin of Hinduism's polytheistic nature comes into being: a culture of idol worship, a culture of color and expression and celebration. Now, I concede to you that in this 5,000-year journey, we've only made a handful of pit stops. Like an express train, we've simply gushed past many other junctions which are worthy in and by themselves of a lengthier halt. So what about scriptures that speak of moral conduct and ethics in society? In this long journey, different codes of conduct came into prominence at different points of time. But here's the catch with moral codes of conduct. They are usually a product in the society in which we live and are bound to evolve over time. So for that reason, in this video, we won't dwell on moral codes of conduct too much. That is it, friends, for this video. Hopefully it places our most prominent scriptures into their right chronology. I know that this has been an info marathon, and even though admittedly it barely scratches the surface, but if I had to leave you with one biggest takeaway, it would be just this. Narratives and stories are extremely important, especially when we are growing up, because they make things so digestible and shareable and easy to grasp. However, if your objective is to make an honest attempt to grasp the nature of reality or to fully understand life in this entirety, and the path that you've chosen is via spirituality, then it is of utmost importance to slowly but necessarily graduate from epics and narratives towards Shruti, the more abstract but profound teachings of the Vedas in general and the Upanishads in particular, which happen to be the philosophical fountainhead of Indian spiritual journey. Thank you guys for watching this video. I will see you soon in another video.